Welcome to the Jeff Crilley Show. And now, here's Jeff Crilley.
Welcome back to the final segment of the Jeff Crilley Show. Doug Box, he is a author, public speaker, family business advisor. He's entertained audiences around the country. I am so excited to have you on the show. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jeff. It's great to be here.
Okay, so what does a family business advisor do?
Well, so family business advisors help families primarily with transitions and succession plans. Most people don't know that family-owned companies are the predominant organization really in our whole economy. And they make up like 70% of GDP, and they account for most of the job growth in our economy. And yet they are inherently fragile. Most family-owned companies won't survive the founder's passing or retirement. A lot of them are sort of born to die. And so what a family business advisor, person like myself, tries to do is go in and do whatever we can to try to offset that sort of natural death of a family-owned enterprise.
Wow. It seems like you're part business advisor, part therapist. Is that
Sometimes.
I mean, you probably have to get into the middle of some deep-rooted emotions sometimes. Do you?
We do. And, it just depends because every situation is so different. But I sort of think of myself as a business shrink. And sometimes families just need help coping with the struggles that they're going through. But because even the families that do well, they still struggle. And, it's just tough when you work with family members, So it's just something that I grew up in a family business and went through some challenges of my own. And so out of that experience, I decided I wanted to try and turn around and help other families avoid some of the pitfalls that we went through.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that because we teased it coming into this segment with J.R. Ewing. What is your connection to J.R. Ewing?
Well, it's a funny little story because I wrote a book about it called Cutter Frisco, growing up on the original Southfork Ranch. And so I grew up on this fabled ranch out in Frisco that's actually still there. It's no longer owned by my family. It's now owned by a guy named Baxter Brinkman. But that was where the original TV show started in 1978, way back when none of those actors or actresses were famous. No one had ever heard of Patrick Duffy, Linda Gray, Victoria Principal. But, of course, now they're all household names.
Of course.
And the only one that was even halfway famous was Larry Hagman, as you know.
Right from I Dream of Jeannie. So this experience that you had really kind of shaped your career, did it not? Without spoiling it for the people who want your book, the story of growing up on Southfork is not necessarily, it doesn't have a happy ending, does it?
No, it doesn't. In a lot of ways, it's kind of a sad tale, but I've used my personal story to kind of turn that around and use it as kind of a caution for other families going through transitions and successions. So I kind of use the story of the ranch as it's sort of like another character in the story, if you will, because the old place is still there. Mm-hmm. I call it the Stonehenge of Frisco. Mm-hmm. And people drive by. Frisco is the second fastest growing city in the country now. I don't know what's number one. I think some town in California. But it's people drive by this place by the droves, and they wonder what that place used to be. And so that's one of the reasons why I wrote the book, just to answer some of those questions.
So for those who aren't familiar with it, there was a fire about a year or so after they stopped filming. Is that right?
Yeah, not long after they stopped filming. The fire destroyed the house, and it was actually 87, in November of 87, and my dad was never able to rebuild it. So it stands there in effigy of our once proud heritage in the oil and gas business and construction and cement and real estate.
Now, you've told me before that the property, after your father sold it, has gone on to become very, very valuable.
Oh, yeah. That's an extremely valuable piece of property. It's at the northeast corner of Preston, which is 289, and Main Street, Frisco. And so that's like the middle of town now, except it's still raw land, and it's no longer in my family. And that's part of what the story's about, is how we acquired the land, how we developed the property, and ultimately how we lost it. It's kind of a sad story, as you say, in the end.
Yes. Texas Patriarch. Tell us about that book.
Okay, so my second book, and actually this is my big book. This is called Texas Patriarch, A Legacy Lost. This is more about the business, whereas Cutter Frisco is really just about that ranch. Texas Patriarch is more about the rise and fall of my dad's phenomenal rise out of poverty, and then what happens when he dies very suddenly of a heart attack at the age of 70, and we were left without much of a succession plan in place. And so it's a chronicle of family conflict and sort of, a cautionary tale of what families should be concerned about and be aware of when they're facing a transition down the road.
Let's talk about your speaking career, because I know that you do a lot of traveling. You're on the road quite a bit. What kind of groups do you typically speak to?
Well, there are three groups that I principally get up in front of. The first are wealth conferences. Then there are the trade associations. You know, just about every industry has a trade association. And they like to have big annual conferences, and they love to have speakers because a lot of their audience members are family-based companies. And so they like to hear my story because I have a true story of sort of a rise and fall. And then the third one is the so-called family business forums. These are really alliances of family companies that are coming together to collaborate, compare notes, and solve problems. And they like to have interesting stories and interesting speakers. So the trade associations, wealth conferences, and the family business alliances are the three primary places that I go speak.
Doug Box, boxfamilyadvisors.com is his website. If somebody's listening to this and they're saying, well, I do have a family business, but maybe it's too small for Doug, do you have a sweet spot? How large a family-owned business would make sense to work with you? You
know, I really don't discriminate against anybody like that. Every family is important. I don't care if you have a $500,000 business or a $500 million enterprise. What's really important is the family, and I don't have a minimum level of enterprise size, but because I really am passionate and want to help families who I think are underserved in this area and sometimes poorly advised about how to get through these difficult transitions. You know, when the founder dies or retires, it's like a new ball game. Everything changes. And so they really need help. They need someone to come in and be their champion and help guide them through that process.
Is it different than, some people may be saying, well, I've got a CPA, they can help me through that, or I've got an attorney, they can help me through that. Your specialty is really unique, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I think so. There are a lot of different advisors that people can actually use because it truly is a multidisciplinary project, but you need someone who has been there, done that, someone who's actually gone through one of these family business crucibles to help them get through sort of the conflict. My sweet spot, I think your question is really managing conflict in a family firm. And when we talk about managing conflict, the thing that we always like to talk about is prevention. That's always a matter of doing good planning, good forward, thoughtful plans. And most family companies, there are studies out about this, 90% of family-held companies do not have any sort of formal succession plan written down. You know, they just don't think too much about the future because they are focused on what's going on today. They're making money, and that's the entrepreneur's pride and joy. So I like to say that these people they don't have time to work on the business because they're so busy working in the business.
Wow.
So I work on the business.
I love that. So we've got about 2 minutes left. I want to give you a chance to tell a J.R. Ewing story because very few people on the show stood up to J.R., but your dad did. He kicked Southfork, or he kicked the entire filming crew off the property. Did he not?
He did. You know, my dad was just one of these extraordinary men, and you know, he didn't need the glitz and glamour of Hollywood. You know, he was a professional football player for the old Detroit Lions, and he actually did a favor for the then mayor of Dallas, Mr. Folsom, Bob Folsom, and they came out and did the 5 or 6 show pilot back in '78. And once that was done, my dad, Kloisbach, just thought, that he had fulfilled the favor and it was time to move on. He was very meticulous about his horse operation out there. He ran that ranch like a Marine barracks. And so when that pilot ended, Leonard Katzman, the executive producer of Lorimar Productions, came back to Dad and said, okay, Klois, we think we may have a series here. We've got great ratings, and we need to know, can we plan to do the series on an ongoing basis? And Dad said, no way. So they then had to go find a new Southfork.
We're unfortunately out of time.
Okay.
We are absolutely going to have you back, Doug. You have great stories, and congratulations on the success of your business. BoxFamilyAdvisors.com is the website, and this has been the Jeff Crilley Show.